Well, Razorback fans, there was a glaring weakness on last year's football team, and it looks like it's going to be a lot better. But how much better will the secondary actually be for the Razorbacks? Let's talk about it on today's Locked On Razorbacks podcast.
You are Locked On Razorbacks, your daily podcast on the Arkansas Razorbacks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Razorbacks podcast. I am your host, John Nabors. I am also the host of Out of Bounds. You can catch every weekday afternoon from 1 to 4 on 103.7 The Buzz and 103.7thebuzz.com. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions do apply. Hope everybody's having a wonderful Tuesday as we are once again talking about everything with the Razorback football fall camp. A few updates that have been going on here too, and nothing, I guess, too strenuous. But still some interesting things as we had a chance to hear from a couple of the secondary players in Dwight McLaughlin and Hudson Cart, as well as Darren Wilson, who, of course, is the Razorback football secondary coach. From Southern Miss, and he's kind of the one that we haven't had a chance to hear very much from. But listen, we don't need to beat around the bush here. We don't need to sugarcoat anything. The Razorback defensive secondary last year was awful, god-awful, atrocious, terrible, the worst. Like everything that you could possibly use as an adjective in a negative way that would describe Arkansas secondary. And it's a shame, too, because Arkansas has, I'm not saying they've always had elite players in the secondary, but they did have a long stretch where they always had really great safeties, had some cornerbacks taken in the NFL draft, have some guys still playing in the NFL even. And it was just such a really frustrating thing to see how bad it was last year. Like, it was bad, over the top, horrible, and bad. And so now it becomes a new year, where you have a new defensive coordinator, you have a new secondary coach, you have a new safety coach, and you have quite a few new faces there in the Razorback secondary. So the assumption is, rightfully or wrongfully, that this Razorback secondary is going to be better because it can't get much worse, right? Well, that could be the reason. I've been saying that a lot, and I mainly try to use it as a tongue-in-cheek comment because I believe there needs to be more to it. You can't just blanket statement go along with, well, it can't be any worse. But you need to know, like, specifics. Like, why won't it be worse? Why will it be better? Because technically, if you say it can't get any worse, it can only get better, going from 131st in the nation to 130th in the nation is technically improvement, and it technically is better. But that's still not going to be acceptable. So will this defense be better in the secondary? And I'm talking about good enough, elite enough, solid enough to make this team so much better to where they're not having to give up 400 million yards in passing per game. Well, the answer to that question, at least from my perspective, is yes. Yes, they will. Because not only do you have some pieces that are coming back that you actually wanted to have back, but you also have some new faces that have been added into the rotation and into the secondary that are really efficient guys that could really be beneficial. And in fact, Darren Wilson, meeting with the media, talked about making that improvement and the things that went along with it from going from last year's secondary to what we'll see next year or this year in the secondary.
Well, what sense do you have about how the pass defense is going to be improved and why?
One way we plan to improve it is within the camaraderie and making we meet all together, because one issue that you see around the country, not specifically last year here, but around the country, period, if you have issues within the pass game, busted coverages, is because of communication. All right, and that's the reason we do the things that we do, myself and Coach Woodson, having guys together and hearing both voices. So now communication is not an issue. Pursuit to the ball is not an issue. That's two ways, communication not busting. One way, communication not busting coverages and getting to the ball.
So I like what he had to say, just talking about how across the nation, you'll see a lot of defenses that are poor and A lot of times it's just being out of position. Sometimes it's being, in the, not having the right depth or the people playing out of position, whatever it may be. There's been reasons because of that. And for this year alone, the ones that Arkansas is really going to rely on experience-wise in the program is Dwight McGlothern and Hudson Clark. Now, you all know how I feel about the no-fly zone Hudson Clark. Statistically, and as far as the ratings going from Pro Football Focus and the year he had last year, he's actually statistically one of the better players in the secondary on this team. He's definitely top 3. And there's a reason why he's on the team, and there's a reason why he's going to play, and probably why he's going to start. And same thing goes with Dwight McGlothern, an incredible player who had so much upside towards the end of the year last year, and you could see the real benefits that he has at that cornerback position and why he was such a highly regarded player coming out of high school. But those are really the only ones that you had that were key contributors to last year. You got Malik Chavis back. You got Ladarius Bishop back. A lot of people forget that he got hurt in the beginning of last season and had to be out all year. So you got him back. But not to say that those guys won't contribute, but as far as big-time contributors, those two are the only ones. But then you add in the transfers like Lorando Johnson. You got him at the safety position. You got Shaheem Singletary, which is the former 5-star player out of high school, transfer from Georgia. You got Al Walcott, the player from Baylor. He's transferred in. You got A.J. Braithwaite, who has been a transfer, who's coming in. You got Keon Stewart, he's a transfer coming in. And you throw in some freshmen in there. You got T.J. Metcalf, who I've really been big on. R.J. Johnson, I think it's Snacks Johnson to you. Dallas Young. You got Jalen Lewis. You got, a few other guys that are just deep. Like, you got depth there. And that's what's important. You got bodies. And last year, the injuries came into play and really hurt you there. But if you're comparing it to last season or even the season before, you had Jalen Catalon, who was an All-American safety, and we know he's not here anymore. He was hurt for the past 2 seasons at Arkansas. He's not here anymore. But you had him, and he was really the best guy that you had in the secondary over the past few seasons. You had a couple of guys here and there that could make some plays. I think Greg Brooks Jr. I always get them mixed up for some reason. Greg Brooks Jr., as well as Joe Fouché, experienced guys in the secondary that transferred, of course, to LSU. Could have been very helpful. But honestly, right here, just looking at those guys and what they've done so far and their experience, where they came from, and the amount of players that you have, I feel like this is a solid group. A solid group. And from what we've heard in practices and from coaching staff, it's more than efficient. I don't think it would be in anyone's best interest to bank on the secondary being elite, top in the SEC. I don't think that's the point, and I don't think it needs to be, nor should you expect it to be this season. You want to have the best of the best, but this season alone, folks, this is all you need from the secondary. Just be okay. Just be okay. Just be able to be a secondary that can at least hold teams to some third down stops. At least be able to get some big turnovers. At least be able to have some 3-and-outs and not give up 3rd and longs. Like, just do it sometimes, if not half the time. If you cut in half last year's team's defense of big plays they gave up and also the yardage that they gave, like if you just cut some of that stuff in half, that team wins 10 games. So you don't have to be elite. Just be decent. Just be average. Just be a threat at times. If you do that, if Arkansas has that this year, they're going to be good. They're going to be good because I think the linebackers are going to be extremely improved. You also got some experienced guys there. I think the D-line, I've been saying this, and it's just one of the predictions, not exactly going on a limb, but I think the defensive line is going to be overall probably the highest quality defensive line you've had in about 10 years, close to it, depth-wise and talent-wise. So you just need to be decent. And I think they have what it takes. I think they have the guys. They have the dudes. They have the experienced dudes, too. Because if you think about it, as far as guys that are starting and playing, you got a senior with McGlothern. You got a senior with Hudson Clark. You got a senior with Al Walcott. You got a junior in Lorando Johnson. You got a senior in Braithwaite. You got a senior in Keon Stewart. You got a senior in Malik Chavis. You got a senior in Ladarius Bishop. You got a bunch of experienced veteran dudes. And you just got to be decent. That's all I'm asking. That's all we all want, right? Just be decent. Like, give us something. So frustrating last year, and I do not want to see those frustrations again this year. Folks, these days, every new potential hire feels like a high-stakes wager for your small business, and you want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster. And all you got to do is go to LinkedIn.com/LockedOnCollege. You do that, the rest of it takes care of itself because it's that easy with the simple tools that they give you to be able to find the candidates that you want. Or if you're someone that's looking for a new job, there's so many different ways of going about finding the type of job, the company, the location, all of those things with LinkedIn. So you got to check it out today. Again, LinkedIn Jobs helps you want to find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster and for free. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply.
You are Locked On Razorbacks, your daily podcast on the Arkansas Razorbacks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, so moving on into the next segment of the Locked On Razorbacks podcast. This was a question that was posed to me by one of you, and I wish I could relate to who it was because it was in the comments section, and it didn't really have a name, so I apologize. But it's a question I've actually been asked multiple times, and I've never really had a chance or really remembered to talk about it. But it was simply about this year's football schedule. Which is the team that scares me the most? Now, we could all take that in a certain way, and we could all look at it in a certain way. But when I'm asked which team scares me the most, I think the fear comes into play of a team that you should beat, that you may be expected to beat, but because of how they play or because of the style that they play or the matchup or whatever it may be, they could be a problem for you and end up giving you an L where you fully expected to win that game. Because here's the thing. Is Alabama the scariest team on the schedule to me? No, because I'm not expecting to win that game. Like, I'm not scared going in there, be like, man, if this doesn't go right, it's going to be bad. No, because it's Bama. The same thing with LSU. It's like, they're LSU. You're not expected to win that game. They have 5-star talent across the board. Like, if you win, it'll be an upset. Like, just being honest about it. So when I say the most scariest team in Arkansas's football schedule this year, I'm not looking at it of just who's the most difficult or who's the best team. I'm looking at it as a team that you should beat, or at least comparatively you could beat. That'll mean a difference between being a good team and a bad team that's on the schedule. And in fact, I'll do this. I'll go through the list of, like, we'll throw out the non-conference games because those aren't the ones. Let's go through a process of elimination in the games that I'm not scared of, or at least don't have the level of fear that I do for my number one. Bama and LSU, have already mentioned it. Like, those games are on the road. They're in less than a month span of within each other. You're not expected to win those games anyway, so throw those out. I'm not scared. Now, this is where it gets kind of weird too. Because after that, there are teams that I feel like you should win or that you could win. Like, so for instance, going to Ole Miss. I think Arkansas is better than Ole Miss. I think Arkansas has performed much better against Ole Miss since Lane Kiffin's been there. I mean, it's compared to other teams. So I don't know if that was a deal with, Kendall Briles just having a great offensive attack against him each year or what. But this is one that I'm not scared of because it could go either way, and it is on the road. So I'm not necessarily scared of that one. I'm not scared of Mississippi State. I think you should beat them at home, especially. I'm not scared of Missouri. You should win the game. Doesn't mean you will, but you should win the game. You are a better team than Missouri. I'm not scared of Florida on the road because who knows what that is even going to look like, and that's not a make or break game for Arkansas. So I won't even throw that in the mix. And Texas A&M is the most flukiest game of all time, so who really knows what's going to happen? So just by a process of elimination, folks, to me, that leaves Auburn. Auburn might be the team that scares me the most because I believe it's a team that Arkansas should beat. It's a team that Arkansas has not beat very often over the past 10 years. In fact, only twice has that happened. One of them was last year when they fired the coach. The other one was in a quadruple overtime game in Fayetteville in 2015. But Hugh Freeze is a good coach. Not taking that away from him. But you got a guy who is in his first year. They don't have a quarterback. They're trying to work through some stuff, and it may take a year or two for them to get it going, which I think that they have a great chance of doing. But this year ain't going to be the year. And you have them at home in November. If you're healthy and everything, I think you'll win that game. You should win that game. That should be the game that you take care of business against. So Auburn might be the team that's scared. Might be the team. Because if you don't win that game, that gives you a home loss, which you don't want to see. That sets you a little bit behind the 8 ball, because if you were going to get Auburn, this is the year to do it. Like, if you were going to get the Tigers, this is it. You have KJ Jefferson, Rocket Sanders. You got them at home. You got an experienced team. They're in a first-year coach, a Hugh Freeze. They don't have a quarterback right now. So, like, this is the year to get Auburn. And if you don't, I'm not saying that you'll lose the rest of the way or you never beat them again. Like, I'm not saying that. But it'd be hard-pressed for me to think that next year on the road against Auburn, when you've lost most of your offense and who knows who else, and they've got now their recruits coming in and they got their transfers and they got these 5-star players, it's like, that's going to be a lot more difficult. So now's the year. This is the year to beat Auburn if you're going to do it. So that's the team that scares me the most. Hopefully that made sense. It made sense in my head, but it doesn't always translate to all of you. I can't understand why none of y'all understand what I'm saying. But I'm sure you guys will completely and totally disagree with me. That's just fine. That's what it's all about. I love it. I love disagreements. We'll get into the final segment here on the Locked On Razorbacks podcast coming up next, so you won't miss it. So stay tuned.
You are Locked On Razorbacks, your daily podcast on the Arkansas Razorbacks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, so final segment here on the Locked On Razorbacks podcast. Now, you're probably looking at the caption, or at least looking at the picture here on YouTube, and you're saying, why is John talking about the Ladybacks? Why are they talking about the women's basketball team in the fall right now when there's football season? Well, here's why. Because they are overseas. They're in Europe. You know, kind of similar to what Arkansas did a year ago when they went to different countries overseas and played some random teams. And in this team case, they played Croatia. But, you know, it's one of those things that's just kind of interesting to see how it plays out. And Arkansas played in their first game over there in Croatia, or against the in Croatia All-Stars. That's what they're called, the in Croatian All-Stars. And I kept thinking that there was some mistake or something was wrong. But Arkansas won this game by a final score of 124-12. 124-12. Arkansas outscored them 43-1 in the first quarter, 27-6 in the second quarter, 29-5 in the third quarter, and then they blanked them in the fourth quarter, 25-0. 25-0. In Croatia, shot 8% from the field, go 4 of 46, 2 of 16 from 3, and 2 of 4 from the free throw line. Arkansas also had 8 players in the double figures. 8, I think. I don't know. The box score is so ridiculous, I can't even tell. But, yeah. Wow. Okay. You know, I always say the old term Hogs by 90, and there's a reason why, because it's always just kind of a mantra of the passion that you have where you're like, hey, I don't care, whatever, we're winning by 90. Screw them. We got it. No problem. It's a confidence thing. Doesn't always work out, but it's a confidence thing. Usually these are the times where I'm like, all right, well, that's more than 90. That's literally 112 points you beat a team by. Hogs by 112 doesn't really have the same ring to it, but you get what I'm saying. I just was really impressed. I don't know anything about the in Croatia All-Star team. I wish I could sit here and say that, you know what, this is a really good team. They got some players coming up over there in Croatia. They're putting it together. This was a squad that was supposed to be really good in their league, and you know they just got manhandled. I have zero clue, no idea. I always wondered, like, what can you say after a game like that? Like, what do you do if you're Mike Nabors in Arkansas? Like, what do you say? All right, this is what we need to work on. No. This is like, what can you say you need to work on? We beat a team by 112 points. And do you take the opposite approach, being like, well, This was a big win for us. No. I don't know what you can take away. Maybe that's a question I got to ask Mike Nabors, but I'm just laughing at that. I was like, women's basketball in general at a lot of different levels have scores like this, like high school, college. I don't think pros have really had that many, but I mean, maybe close to it. I don't know what it is about women's basketball that has these things, but hey, better than losing. Winning by 112, I think Mike Nabors and the squad will take it every single time. I know I will. But either way, appreciate everybody listening in the Locked On Razorbacks podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or on Google Play. You can also get after me on Twitter, BuzzJohnNabors, for any questions, comments, concerns that you may have. We'll keep it going from there. Same podcast time, same podcast channel tomorrow afternoon. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you then.